Greetings, beautiful dreamers. My name is Melanie Stewart, and I am your host of this podcast series, Beyond Gaia. Today, you are listening to episode 1, and my heart truly welcomes you and thanks you for joining me in this transmission. I am new at recording a podcast, so I appreciate you bearing with me and allowing me to find my feet, as I don't feel in these early days it truly matters as to how beautifully spoken and organized this is, but more so that I speak from the heart, that I actually share with transparency and authenticity. And what I plan on sharing with you and is to take you upon a journey of experiencing my astral projection voyages. I plan on reliving the astral projection experiences and sharing them with you. Astral projection for me has been something that has come very natural since a very young age. Now, I grew up, even right up until about 10 years ago, not being surrounded by any type of spiritual community or even having access to any resources where I could discover more about it. I grew up in a rural area, and astral projection for me has been very natural, something that I could do with ease from as far back as I could remember. And I'm speaking of a conscious astral projection. And I was living these incredible astral projection experiences without even actually understanding that they were an astral projection. I didn't even have a language for it. All I knew is that it was something that I could do with ease and grace, and that brought me a lot of joy and understanding of myself and my greater galactic family. And I was really quite okay with it. I didn't need any label for it. And to be honest, I didn't realize for a very long time that others weren't experiencing the same thing that I was experiencing. That they weren't able to just consciously and at will project themselves to any location or a spacecraft or within another race, an extra-dimensional or extraterrestrial race, at will. And also, it's very important to note that it needs to be relevant for me or for the person having the experience in order to do so at will. So it was much later that I actually realized that it wasn't something that everybody was practicing. Now, I believe that there was truth there in me believing that it was something that everybody was doing, because everybody does have this ability within them innately. But as with anything, whether it be learning a new modality or riding a bike, it does actually require practice, and for us to strengthen those muscles that we actually have naturally, so that we can fire those new neural pathways to actually understand that this is a way of living, that it's very much a way of living for us. And this is how astral projection has been for me. It is a way of living. In many ways, it could be seen that I live a double life, in the sense that I have my physical projection here, which we term as being a physical reality that I live and very much enjoy. But I also spend a very large amount of time consciously astral projecting and exploring and getting to know more of myself. I would like to bring attention to the word astral projection and the definition that I've discovered, because there's many different definitions as to what astral projection truly is. Now, of course, I'm referring to a conscious astral projection, not an astral state that we go into when we are in our dream state, or what would be considered to be an awake state. And I don't necessarily see it, and this is how it was shown to me, So remember, you find your own truth in your own resonance within this. I don't see it as being an out-of-body experience, although we can experience it like an out-of-body experience, but that's not the true mechanics of an astral projection, which is what I'm actually referring to here. So we can experience it as feeling like and being very much like an out-of-body experience. But in truth, and this is the truth that I've discovered, astral projection is a true inner body experience, not an outer body experience. When you're astral projecting, you are attuning with all that you are. You are consciously attuning and aligning yourself, your third, fourth density perceiving mind, with the higher self version of you that is always seated in the chair, so to speak. Looking at your film strips and deciding which frame to focus on. Now that version of you is the version that is always in spirit, in the blueprint realm, that gets to have fun choosing which frame to focus on, that then creates your linear experience of continuity and storytelling in your physical reality. In essence, you are aligning yourself with the higher self version of you that is always in existence to be able to have an integrated experience of projecting your projection. So this is why I don't refer to an astral projection as being, mechanically speaking, an out-of-body experience. What we are doing is we're shifting our projection that we actually have into this reality. We are actually learning to shift that projection to the higher astral planes. So we are projecting our projection. So I just wanted to share with you my definition of how I see and experience astral projection. When I am taking you upon these journeys, I've had a very, very diverse range of astral experiences. And when I say diverse, I have cultivated very loving, conscious relationships with extraterrestrial beings, Sasquatch beings, future counterparts. And when I say future, I mean future Earth counterparts, as far up Earth as 700-800 years upline. What we would consider to be a past timeline or another parallel timeline that we consider to be past. I've gone back to past versions of myself from this incarnation, so back to my younger self, and I can actually visit her and communicate with her in very specific detail. Mythical beings, elementals, nature spirits, all a very broad range of galactic races. And with each new moon and each full moon, I plan to share a new episode with you so that you may, if you choose, and this is your invitation, to join me on that journey of reliving the experience. However, today I'm feeling a little bit nervous, and by the way, I've actually chosen to record this to you on the day that it's being delivered because I preferred it for it to be fresh and flow in the moment. It is the full moon in Sagittarius. I'm feeling slightly a little nervous simply because I'm going to start my first episode, this episode 1, rather than in an area within my astral experiences that's very familiar to me, that I've, you could say, clocked up a lot of hours visiting that race, visiting different dimensions of the astral planes that do become like another home to me. I'm actually starting in an area that I've been visiting. It's still fairly recent to me. I've only had a couple of experiences doing it, and that's been over the last couple of months. So rather than me share something that's super familiar, I'm actually choosing to share from a territory that's very new to me, that I don't have all the language for it. And I was feeling into it this morning as to why I was actually choosing to start there. And that place that I'm choosing to start you on today in episode 1 is Arcturian. And the reason for that is because I remembered that when I was within the astral projection with a being who I'm going to introduce you to very soon, She was the one that seeded the idea, the inspiration, the excitement that I felt within my heart to share these experiences, my astral experiences, via a podcast. And thus, this is where Beyond Gaia birthed. So, given that she was the one that seeded the idea for me, I felt that it was very fitting for me to start with her. Though my experiences, as I've said, with her are still very new that I'm conscious of, although I have a lot of other experiences with her that I'm just beginning to remember. So I thank you again very much for choosing to be here with me. What I'm going to do now is dive straight in and share with you how I actually begin my conscious astral projection experience. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail as to how I enter the astral state. However, there will be a link below to my Patreon page, and I have many different membership tiers there. The basic one, very, very affordable, where you can join me, where I teach from week to week, and I'll share all the information that I've actually gathered and learnt on how to become an efficient astral projector. And I'll also be sharing an actual guided astral immersion. So I'll be taking you on an immersion to different races on each full moon and new moon. So that'll be separate to the podcast. The podcast is me reliving my experiences. Over on Patreon, it is where I will actually offer guided immersions where you actually join me and I'm guiding you to have your own experience. I do also plan on having other guest speakers who are astral voyagers themselves join me on this podcast, and there is some exciting news coming there, but I won't say too much more about that just yet. So today I am taking you to a experience of projecting into Arcturus, into the race of Arcturian beings. Now, what prompted me to start actually visiting the Arcturus race, even though they'd been on my awareness, I feel a deep, deep connection there with the race. What prompted me to do so was an astral experience that I was having in what I would explain as being a beautiful astral forest. And it is a forest that came to me right in my earlier days of astral projecting. It's been with me for a very long time. It's a very familiar place that I visit. It's a very vibrant forest. If you can imagine an astral version of Gaia reflecting her forests that are lush and vibrant and more pigmented with colour and full of redwood trees and sequoias and cedars and giant pine trees, and the floors of the forest are covered in wildflowers and green ferns, and the forest meets a body of water, a natural body of water that is vibrant and full of life. This is a place, it's become very much an active portal that I visit, and I've met a lot of beings here. And it was through one of my astral projection experiences that I was sitting within this forest, and I was actually with my Sasquatch counterpart, who I will introduce to you and share some very incredible experiences that I've had with him in some upcoming episodes. But for the purpose of resharing this experience, he was sitting by my side, and we were both sitting underneath a large sequoia tree. We had our eyes closed, and we were in a very deep state of what I would consider to be going deeper. You're already in the astral state, and then you actually choose to go into a meditative state within the astral state, and it actually takes you to a deeper state again. something that I will also go into more detail about later. Whilst we were doing this, I then felt a presence of not one but several beings that started surrounding us in a circle. And I opened my eyes out of the meditation whilst I'm still within the astral projection, sitting under the tree, and I see a circle of 12 beings that are actually surrounding us. And when I say 12 beings, they look like 12 pillars of light. Very, very vibrant beams of light. And at first I didn't know who they were. And then there was an invitation from one of the beings, and my Sasquatch counterpart assisted me in facilitating this. He went and spoke to one of the beings first and then told me that there was an invitation for me to join one of these beings. And I met one of these beings outside of the circle on what I would consider to be this beautiful large flat rock ledge, where I stood, and this being then showed itself to me in what I would consider to be a symbolic representation of what they would look like if they were in the physical. And through telepathic communication, I discovered that it was an Arcturian council that had actually come to visit me. And there was this one being that was communicating with me and making itself known, and sort of opened the door of the invitation for me to explore more of their race. It also became apparent to me that one of my, or I would go as far as saying that the most successful incarnation that other aspects of myself have had is an Arcturian lifetime. That is currently, everything's happening in the now, right? That in this now, there is another version of myself that is an Arcturian being that has had the most successful, the most expansive creative lifetime. So all of this became very aware to me in these moments during this astral projection. I was also gifted with a smoky quartz skull in that moment, which didn't mean a lot to me. It meant a lot to me at the time, but I didn't actually understand the symbology of it till much later, which I will share with you in another episode. But for the purpose of today, I'm speaking more about the Arcturian experience. So after that projection, it was about a month later before I actually felt the invitation come again. Now, when I say I felt the invitation, I actually get, when I've got specific beings that are relatively new to my conscious self, I find an invitation comes in through a pulsing on the top of my head. And that will be just before I go into my nightly astral projection state, which is something that I do just about every night of the week. I go into a conscious astral projection. I sit on my bed and I enter the astral projection state. And I started to get this pulsing sensation. And then when I actually felt into it, I could actually feel that it was an Arcturian being. Through my many years of practicing and playing and strengthening those muscles that I spoke about earlier in astral projecting, I've actually learnt to be able to sort of read the frequency of the different races, and it becomes clear quite quickly as to the different energies that come from the different races and how you can best interpret those energies. So I knew it was an Arcturian being. What I would also like to add is that mostly, the majority of the time, when we are encountering other beings within an astral projection state, we are encountering another version of ourselves. And when I say another version of ourselves, meaning that I have my own higher self and my own soul. This other being has their own higher self and their soul. We even have very different personas. However, we both share the same oversoul. So it is like being two branches of the same oversoul tree. And this is very much needed within the astral projection, and the reason why I feel that it happens the majority of the time is so that when we are encountering another being, we feel that sense of familiarity. We feel that sense of being at home, even though it may be a very new environment, even though we may not have seen or experienced this being that's standing in front of you before. You can feel the connection. You can feel the sense of home. You can feel your heart responding. Even if you can't make sense of it, you can feel the resonance, and it is truly something that is beyond words. And I begin to get emotional when I speak about it, because it is such a palpable emotional connection. When you have a being that is standing in front of you where you have been connected for eons, and you are coming into that conscious awareness of them and experiencing open contact with them in this way as a multidimensional being that's choosing to live beyond your physical reality in this way, meeting them halfway rather than actually hoping that they come to you in a dream, or hoping that you get a sign or some type of synchronicity from them, or that they show up in a meditation. You're actually choosing to be the bridge yourself and meet them halfway. And to have the experience of an encounter where you're with another aspect of the same oversoul is truly one of the most profound experiences I've ever had. I don't, apart from giving birth to children, and I have two, there isn't another experience I've had that is so high and with such an omnipresent of unconditional love than experiencing that. And this is probably also a perfect time for me to share with you that at no time do I take anything, any type of substance or psychoactive that actually alters my state of consciousness, simply because I don't need to. Is that something I may do later? I would consider it, but I haven't actually needed it. So I just want to make that very clear. So I received the invitation coming by the knocking on the top of my head. And when I say knocking, it's a pulsing of energy that I feel. I go and sit down on my bed. I enter an astral state. And the first state I actually go to when I'm going through into an astral projection, simply because it's not needed, but I've discovered that you unlock a lot of wisdom, a lot of other experiences for where you would have possibly had. If astral projection resonates with you, it's highly probable that you've actually have a lot of other lifetimes where you've gained quite a bit of mastery in astral projection. So I visit first, when I enter an astral projection state, is my ancient/future astral temple. And it's a temple that I enter that becomes a doorway for me to enter any other realm. It's not needed. I did it for a long time without it, but since I've been accessing it, it's activated all these other experiences that I've had across many other timelines, and it assists me in integrating it into this now, and then utilizing that as a bridge to launch me in many different directions. So I've gone to my ancient astral temple. I've entered in, and I've known that I've had this feeling that I need to be visiting the Arcturus race, but I actually wasn't sure how I was going to do it, because I couldn't find any framework for myself to actually travel there. Now, with all my other astral experiences that I have, unlike many others will actually use a form of seeing themselves sort of shooting or flying through out through the Earth's atmosphere, seeing themselves flying through the galaxy. to be able to come to their destination within the astral voyage, that has actually never been my style. Instead, because it just didn't, I had this natural default that was built within me where I was choosing to have an astral experience. I could feel the resonance and I could project myself straight to the location. So it's almost like a form of teleportation in a way. I didn't actually need to have the travel in between. And I discovered, and I'm probably going into more detail than what I intended, but I discovered that is because the reason that I can do that, or we can do it, is because I've had a lot of astral experiences there prior, even in other lifetimes. So therefore, it's natural for me at will. I can feel a resonance of somewhere, a race I'd like to meet, a craft I'd like to be upon, and my vibration seems to be able to shift, and the next thing I know, after raising my frequency, I'm there. I'm there for that I'm there at that destination. In this case, though, I didn't actually feel as if I had that reference. I didn't feel as if I had that I can just land there, because I actually didn't feel as if it was somewhere where I had ventured out or explored that far. Now, I have failed to mention that Arcturian beings are a very, very high vibrational beings. They are non-physical. They are masters of their reality, and not only masters of the reality, but of creating through some very brilliant technology as to how they design and create their reality, and even as far as how they create worlds and even planets and constellations. They are very advanced. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about them in this podcast with the specifics of the race, because that's not what this is about. But I will share more information about them, the race specifically, over on my Patreon page. So I decided that I would opt for this sort of flying and allowing myself to project my projection as high up as I could possibly go. And I even saw myself traveling through something that would be similar to a wormhole or a tunnel that was sort of spiraling upwards. And I allowed myself to sort of go and go and go and go. And I was traveling for minutes upon minutes, even though it felt like I was outside of time, until I could actually start to feel the resonance of where I was actually needing to be. And I did. I had, through the ancient astral temple, I'd shot myself out, and I was traveling and traveling and traveling, and then I actually found myself in front of what I would consider to be an astral Arcturian stargate. I would actually say that, and that's a very cliche word, I know, to use, but it's the only word I can find that could best describe what I saw. It was almost like seeing an opening in space and time. However, I had this feeling come over me at the same time that I didn't need to go there. I didn't actually need to access this stargate. It wasn't in my best interest to do so at the time. And then I actually felt this and heard this telepathic conversation to go back to the forest. And then I remembered, well, that's where I've actually had my very first Arcturian experience. I'm going to go back to the astral forest. And the moment that I actually bring that astral forest into my awareness, I teleport and I'm straight back there in the forest. And I make my way through to this space within this astral forest that is like a clearing in the center of the forest. It is a circle clearing. It's surrounded by these giant trees. As I've mentioned, it meets a body of water. It's the most peaceful, vibrant, lit up landscape to visit. And as I'm approaching this clearing within the center of the forest, I start to see this very, very large being of light. And when I say large, she was quite enormous, this glowing being of light. And I made my way to her and I stood before her in absolute awe. And the moment that I got close enough to her energy, to this glowing aura that she had that was very expansive, the setting within the astral forest began to change, and I started seeing everything in a very psychedelic nature. Now, I haven't actually had a psychedelic experience, but if I was to imagine what that would be like, I'm fairly sure this was very close. Everything started to be glowing and showing very sort of bioluminescent rainbow fractals of light. It was, and everything had come to life around me. Everything I could see, the flowers almost like they're them breathing and the frequency coming from them, and I could see the energy that the trees were emanating, and it was a phenomenal experience. And then as I bring my attention to her, I start to see in a semicircle this continuum that doesn't really end, because at the end of the semicircle it just kind of kept going and going, and it faded into the background, was these other just continuums of her energy. So if you were to imagine her as being this being of light, but she started to show herself in physical form, and they will always do so in alignment with what is relevant for us, how you are actually needing to perceive them and see them. How I was seeing her, I then saw all these other different versions of her happening simultaneously. There were multiple versions that I could see. And it was breathtaking. I had many conversations with her, and she showed herself more and more to me. And you will notice by the artwork that I actually have up on screen that I've done my best, and I'm not quite there yet, but this is as close as what I've been able to get, to give you a creative visual for you to actually see how she showed herself to me. She had white covering over her, like cloaked over her head with like a white robe, and I could see all the psychedelic colours around her. She had this bits of bioluminescence on her cheeks, and at other times she just had these beams of purple light that was actually coming from her. Her eyelids, they were closed, but they sort of emanated this purple glow that come from them as well. She was very peaceful. She is very peaceful, very nurturing, and she took me through some lessons at the time that helped me understand to not look up to her with awe, but that I could actually, in that moment, and in the astral I could. Physically, I'm a long way from that, but to actually match her frequency within the astral. And I got very close to actually doing that, so that I sort of emanated the same energy that she was. So she said, see yourself the same as me. She didn't want me to look up to her with any sense of awe, even though I knew that we were reflections of one another. And she sort of indicated how I was needing to allow myself to shine and to stand tall and to hold my head up high and to share these stories. And I'm even feeling emotion now as I'm sharing it, because she's so sincere. It still touches me very much sharing this. To continue to be myself, and that by me sharing these stories is a bridge for me to be more and more of myself. The conversation between us was a lot more in depth than that, but I'm sharing with you the essence of what transpired between the two of us. She really offered me a lot of encouragement, and I see now that in my own way. I have been and I am like a sunflower that is gently growing and growing towards her and another being within the Arcturian race that I will speak to you about on another day, that I'm working very closely with them. She inspires me a lot and works with me very closely with regards to my creativity, but she has a very, very expansive energy. And when I'm communicating with her, I also have a dual level of awareness where I'm also communicating with the collective. Even though I'm speaking to her individually, I can also still feel the Arcturian collective. So this was one of the Arcturian experiences that I was actually wishing to share with you, but I'm actually going to move on to, she invited me the next time to actually visit her closer to their Arcturian frequency, and the reference she gave me to actually use within my astral projection is a cosmic field, and that's all that was given to me. She also gave me her name, which I'll actually share with you here today, which is Anuba. So shortly thereafter, whether that be days or weeks, I'm really not sure of time, I chose to enter an astral projection state again, and this time I was actually going to visit her within this cosmic field. And when you've been practicing and playing astral projection for a while, you really understand how to get quite clear in your visualizations and to really hone with laser focus your frequency into very specific areas so that you can match the vibration and allow yourself essentially to visit the frequency of their race. And I found through entering the, I also wish to share, as I was entering the astral projection to visit her in the cosmic field, I went to my ancient astral temple again, and this time I actually saw, and it happens most times, but I'm often surprised by the types of beings that I meet there. At my astral temple, on the left-hand side, before I enter in the door, there is always a being that's there, and that being changes all the time. And this time I saw, and it was my first time experiencing it at my astral temple, the being that I would consider to be Hatha. How she depicted herself to me, but even before I could see anything, I could feel the frequency. And it was very pure, it was very nurturing, mother-like, this beautiful harmonics that seem to, that I'm looking for words to describe her frequency, that come from this being Hatha. And it's not about why she was there, but it was more so that I was grateful that she was there. When you're in that astral projection state, you're not of your lower mental mind and of the mind of logic and comprehension, and it's not necessarily about the whys. Occasionally that can come in, and again, it usually does so when it's relevant for you to know, but a lot of other times you're just there and you're very present in the moment, and the why doesn't matter. It doesn't even come, it doesn't even come into that frame that you're in. So I had this experience with Hatha, and it was very short, but it was profound for me. And I entered the temple, and I also knew then that it meant that this being that I was going to see, Anuba, there was a connection there between the two of them. I entered the astral temple, which at another time I will go into a lot more detail as to what that looks like on the inside for me and what you could perhaps also experience for yourself. And I spent more time in the astral temple than what I usually would, so I could really hone my frequency in on what that reference was that she'd given me, because it was beyond the words cosmic field. What she'd actually done with me is downloaded me with that template, with the blueprint that I was actually needing to access that with her. And I had, as I always do with my astral projections, unlimited faith and trust in the process. So I found myself projecting into a cosmic field, and it did take me a little longer to have the higher frequency to actually be able to access it. And when I say a little longer, just me focusing truly on the location and also raising my frequency, how I was actually feeling within, so I could be that vibrational match. And when I landed there, the best way to describe it would be, if we have the most beautiful fields here upon Earth, if you could actually imagine that mirrored within a galaxy, but instead, and once again, everything is very full of life in a very conscious, obvious way to you when you're actually experiencing it. So I'll give you a visual to play with here. I landed beside one very large oak tree that was in the middle of this cosmic field. And this oak tree was very grand, and I noticed that it had roots that seemed to spread out beyond where I could see. The field felt buoyant under my feet, not solid like what you would actually step on at Earth here, or even I experienced my astral forest as being quite solid under the foot, and I could feel it and I could smell the dirt. This was very different. This felt buoyant underneath my feet. I could feel it was a very different fabric of reality that I was experiencing. Again, the tree, and I have a lot of experience in communicating with trees, and I could actually feel this tree's welcoming me. I could feel the essence of the oak in itself. I could see the veins running through this tree, the vibrancy coming from the tree. And then as I looked at the field, it was full, but not in lines and structured like you would see here on Earth. It was full of tall lavender and also other little purple wildflowers. It was full. Like I looked out and I could just see a sea of purple. And I could actually, in a very visceral way, smell lavender. And at the time that I was actually having this astral projection experience, I was going through a very, very deep shift within myself and experiencing a rebirth and some heaviness quite a lot of heaviness that I'd actually made peace with, but I was very aware that my energetic field I was still in a process of healing and integration, let's just say that. And therefore, the lavender felt so on point for what I was actually needing. And so as I look out at the sea of lavender, and at the same time, I want to draw reference to the fact that the sky was beyond what we could actually see here. It was it's almost as if you can actually feel the stars speaking to you, and like you can touch them, and colours in the sky that we actually don't see here. And there was one very bright, very large, almost as if it was sort of hanging low, bright purple star. And I knew that this related to her, and I also had a feeling that this relates to also a male Arcturian counterpart of mine, who's even a higher frequency than her again. And I'm still in very early days of communicating with him, so I'm going to hold off for some time before I speak about him, because he's got a very, very big energy. This purple star relates to them both, and I'm still discovering how that is relevant, but I wanted to drop that in for you as a visual. and almost positioned underneath this purple star as I see her standing in the middle of this sea of purple flowers in this field. And I approach her very excitedly, and we end up sitting down. And sitting down as much as a being that's non-physical, she does give herself, when she shows herself to me, what we would consider to be quasi-physical, or a slight sense of density that takes shape as a physical form in front of me. And whilst I was there, I did notice that I was having moments of sort of feeling almost like the framework flicker. And what I mean by that is that me learning to hold that very high frequency within that framework of the astral projection. Because remember that each astral projection you're having is literally, that film strip, or you deciding which frame to focus on. And so I could actually feel myself, and she assisted me and actually teaching me how I could actually maintain the very high frequency that I was in. And at one point I did experience a spinning, like everything started moving and spinning quite quickly. I didn't feel, as you don't within the astral, any sense of nausea or being out of balance, but it assisted me in learning how to find my balance whilst in that very high vibrational state. And remember, this is essentially the first time that I actually managed to sort of hold my frequency there. So she helped me actually understand how to do that. She gave me a lot of information, which I won't go into detail with right now, as to how I can help myself in the state of healing and the big shift that I was moving through. She gave me some very useful information. And then she could see that there were some moments where the frame was still flickering, and she took me over to this large oak tree, which had beautifully agreed to be this anchor for me, and that I can use it as an anchor point when actually landing there to visit her more often, so that I was sitting with my back up against this oak tree. And while I was actually communing with her. So there is that experience, and there's one more Arcturian experience with Anuba that I actually wish to share with you. And this experience is very fresh. It only happened last night. I was going into the astral projection state. I went to my ancient astral temple, and at the door this time was a male figure, and he looked almost like a very large Egyptian statue at first. Very, very tall. And I thought that was really interesting, that it seemed more of a statue than a being. And then when I sort of focused on the statue, the next thing, the frame changed, and I had a man that was standing in front of me that would look Egyptian and very olive skin, very short black hair, handsome but a bit older. I would say, if I was to put an age to this, it would be 50s. And he then went from standing to having one knee down on the floor before my astral temple in front of me, and he told me to put out my hands, and he gave me a handful of gold coins. And at first I wasn't going to accept them, and then he reminded me that it was important, and that it was a gift, and that I take this handful of gold coins. And then the next thing, I look down, and I have this pouch going like a how you'd have a sling bag on across my body, with the pouch hanging off it. And he looked down at it, and then that's where I knew I had to put these coins in. That symbology I am still unpacking. I thanked him sincerely, and we embraced, and then I went inside my astral temple. and I've projected myself into this cosmic field once again, and I've landed beside this giant oak tree. And at first I didn't see Anuba at all, and I felt the call, the invitation to walk through this purple sea of flowers and lavender. And as I'm making my way through, and the flowers were really quite tall this time, taller than last time, like almost at my head height. Again, things are appear very differently to how they do here on Earth. And I'm making my way through these flowers, and then I come to a clearing in the center, but the clearing is like a spiral pattern that's within the flowers that's been pushed down in the center of the field to actually create, well, not pushed down, but through energy and through vibration has created this large spiral pattern, almost like a crop circle would be the best way to describe it, in the center of this cosmic field. And it was this large spiral, but parts of this spiral had sort of these little arms coming off it. And I just knew that it was my invitation to actually walk the spiral. And the spiral had hues of purple to it, yes, from the flowers, but it was also, there was gold that was actually coming from the spiral. So I walked the spiral and I could feel myself shifting and the frame sort of becoming blurry, and it almost like it was compressing a little, and I sort of felt almost like I was sort of going into right down to the center of the spiral. And then the next thing, the frame shifted again, and this time it's like I came out of the spiral on a different version of this cosmic field. And this time I look ahead and I can see this beautiful geometric shape, and it's difficult to find the name for a shape because it's not like anything that I've actually seen here before, and I love sacred geometry. Like a crystalline type temple. It wasn't very tall. It was only about 2 or 3 stories tall, but it was like this crystalline temple, and it wasn't very large either. Almost like what you would consider the size to be like a 2-story house. And I was drawn to it, and it was, so I'm approaching this crystalline like temple, like a dome. And as I do, I actually see Anuba then presents herself to me, and she's standing there within the frame of a doorway and asked me if I'd like to join her inside, and I do. And again, her energy is very expansive. Her energy is, I'm very aware when I'm with her that the energy is the dome. Her energy is the cosmic field. Her energy is the purple star that's above. Her energy is, and at times, even though I'm sure that what I'm experiencing of her is just a fractal of her, it's still very, very expansive. And I understand that fractal perhaps will begin to increase and grow as I actually learn to be able to hold and match more of her frequency. So I enter inside this dome, this temple of sorts, and at first I don't see much inside, and it's almost like I need to adjust to the vibration. And then I see a couple of steps to step down, and then I see this large rug in the center of the floor, and it's golden, and it has this purple woven pattern in it. And she is sitting on the rug and invites me to go and sit down with her, and I sit down with her on this rug, and I look around, and all of a sudden now my vision becomes clearer, and I can see what's inside, and it is filled with a multitude of different flowers that are just massively in bloom, all different sorts of flowers. There's roses that are colors like I've never seen before, and iris and orchids, and all different sorts of flowers. And again, I'm still unpacking how this is relevant for herself and me. I do have some idea, but I'm still learning more about this, and this is a very fresh experience. And then I am just in awe by what I am surrounded by, and this magnificent being that is Anuba that is sitting before me. And she sort of invites me to move a little closer to her, where if she was to have knees, we were both sitting with our legs crossed, sort of in that lotus position, and she had her knees butted up against my knees, and we sort of formed the shape between the two of us coming together, like a pyramid. And then she held out her hands, and then when I took her hands and I was sitting there was no words at this point or telepathic communication beyond the fact where I actually felt the two of our energies merge. I felt us become this pyramid. And then when I just allowed it and really breathed into it further, it went from being the pyramid to out the top of the pyramid. We became, and this is difficult to put words to, so I'm going to do my best because I haven't shared this with anybody else. The two of us became this large violet flame, this large purple flame. The violet flame just sort of came from the top of the pyramid. Well, actually, the pyramid then sort of started to not become so obvious in the experience, and it then became about this large violet flame, and the two of us were like dancing together as one, as this big flame, and I could see the gold flickers within the flame, and this is what I was experiencing. And it was truly phenomenal. I was watching so much that was being burnt off and transmuted, and I was also experiencing myself light up in ways that I'd come close to finding anything else that even matches it within the astral experiences that I've had. Breathtaking, very palpable. There's this beautiful energetic exchange between the two of us. And I could also feel beyond words as to what this was actually doing for the structure of my being. And then the frame shifted from whilst I was actually in this violet flame experience with her, I could see sort of like embers and particles coming off it, and the stuff that was almost like transmuting and burning off like dross. And then there was another part that was actually sending out like these golden embers that I was watching as I was the flame, and I was watching these golden embers just make themselves like float around the galaxy. And then she reminded me in that moment to also see these golden embers float around our earth, and I was visualizing then earth came into the framework, and I was watching these golden embers just land across the planet. Incredibly powerful and beautiful and very serene at the same time. And then from there, after the violet flame experience, the frame shifted, and she has handed me, and this is the second one I've got, this very pure, it was amethyst crystal skull. And obviously this very big theme with regards to purple and violet and lilac and these color rays. And what I just would like to give a little bit of framework, whilst I'm very, very excited to be receiving what I've now received energetically as two crystal skulls. I have a huge resonance with the crystal skulls and the master crystal skull, and however, I don't go out of my way looking for them or bringing through more information. They seem to sort of come to me at the right time. I do actually have another astral projection experience where I went, actually I'm going to share a little bit about that at the end because it is relevant. So I'm just going to pause on that for a minute. So the crystal skulls seem to find me. My point here that I'm attempting to make is that they don't. I don't go looking for them. I don't go It's not a favorite thing that's in my awareness. Yes, I absolutely love them, but I don't think about them that often unless something comes into my awareness where I feel as if they're relevant for me. So I was very surprised. I was not thinking about skulls at all, or the last one that I received, because that was months ago. And I was very surprised. And as I held this, and it was such pure color in the amethyst, like I hadn't seen before. It almost looked like a clear quartz skull with just this tinge of purple. I took the skull and I actually held it up to my third eye, and I was breathing it in, and some of these experiences that I had from here, I'm still downloading, because I'll remember a lot from what happens, and then as I continue to go by, I in my days of integration, I download more information. But I do remember that this had to do with an upgrade of my own crystalline skull. I could feel the skull and the energy of it shooting all the way down through my spine. And it was phenomenal. It was phenomenal. And when I say, this is in a beautiful segue, when I actually say that I could feel that it related to an upgrade of my own crystalline skull, I feel, given that this only happened last night, tonight I am embarking upon an experience in the astral that I believe will be my most profound experience I'll ever have. And I'm not putting expectations on it, but I can feel it in my bones. And that experience is that I have had since I was a child, right back from the moment I can walk and I've got my first memories, a fear that I've lived with that nobody else has been able to quite understand or help me integrate or heal. And I have visited it so many times and done so much work on it, and about every 4 or 5 years it continues to cycle back. And this last couple of months I've been sort of moving through this fear. It had cycled back. I hadn't had it for about 5 years, and I was moving through it, and it shows itself in many different ways. But at the essence, I discovered that this fear relates to me having a fear or received a lot of trauma around death. Now, this was quite surprising for me when I discovered this, because this version of me doesn't fear death, especially the fact that I astral project so often, because when you astral project, you actually get to understand what it feels like, what it would be like on the other side once you transition, if that makes sense. You actually get to know how you navigate once you transition, how you actually navigate the higher planes once you transition. So astral projecting is very much needed if you actually would like to understand how to do that. It's something that we will all actually have to experience, so you can actually choose to experience it as somebody that's very experienced in that area, or experience it for the first time when you transition. So going back to, I'm bringing the pieces of the puzzle together, going back to an earlier astral projection experience I had that I paused on before. I went into a very dark temple within myself within an astral projection. No matter how dark it is, it was still beautiful. And I went down a very long, narrow, confined set of stairs, and to find myself at the bottom of this temple, and all I could see in the temple, it was a very small space. And this is after I'd been doing a lot of work and visited many dark temples within. This one was different. What I discovered was a crystal skull, and this is the other time I've had a skull come to me, that was sitting on like a pillar, and there it was guarded by a large snake, a large serpent. And it took a little while for me to actually master being able to deal with the serpent and my own inner serpent. And then when I was able to finally approach the crystal skull, it had a message for me, and it shared with me that the only way I would truly move beyond this fear in this lifetime is that if I allowed myself to experience what it would actually feel like to die. And when I say to die is, we know that it's a transition. It's simply moving from one state of being to another. But not just in the astral projection state where I can actually know what it's like on the other side, but the actual process of wherever that fear comes up of showing you the worst case scenario, that I go into an astral state, see myself in that worst case scenario where the fear feels the most triggered, even though it is related to fear of death. There are many branches that come off it that show itself as such. And there's one particular experience that I have at the moment that has been very triggering for me. So I go into an astral state. I allow myself to be in that triggered experience and allow the worst thing that the fear is telling me that could happen to happen. So allow myself to go through the experience of death, that in the astral sense I'm dying, experience actually what it feels like to go through the period of transition out into the astral, have the very visceral experience and allow myself to be reborn. And then after I'm actually reborn, take note of the day and the time, and also look at the astral chart and look at how, because that'll be very significant for me moving forward, because that will imprint and change a lot of my karma and a lot of my experiences, and it's something that's very much needed for me to move past this. So tonight is that night that I'm actually doing that. I'm actually going to have the death experience this evening. And it's something that I'm guiding myself through. I feel very supported in being able to do so. So the amethyst skull and me actually feeling as if there was an upgrade taking place to my crystal skull. I believe that it does to my own crystal skull of my physical being. I actually feel relates to this experience that I'm going to be having this evening. So I will report back on that. I'm not sure if it's going to be in the next episode, which will be in the next upcoming new moon, or whether it will actually be in a much later episode. I will just leave the door open and allow myself to follow the excitement as to when I feel I need to share it with you. So after I've finished with this experience with Anuba, which was only last night, and I came back through into the astral temple, and then I went out the door and this beautiful male being was still there, and I offered to give him some of the gold coins back and he wouldn't take it. So instead I offered him an exchange of love and my deep gratitude and that he be blessed, and I made my way back to my physical body. So this is just a taste of the Arcturian race, just a taste of Anuba, who I've actually shared with you in episode 1. Just a very small grain of sand with regards to the astral experiences that I will be sharing with you. The other experiences I can share in a lot more detail because I've really established myself like family, like you would when you're with family, amongst many other races and aboard ships and all sorts of wonderful experiences. Where the Arcturian, like I said, it's very new to me, so I didn't have as much framework to grab upon for you. But I do very much hope that you have found, even if it's just a glimmer of hope or inspiration for you to explore more of yourself. I thank you very much for choosing to be here, and your presence is co-creating this transmission with me, so thank you sincerely. I thank you to my greater galactic family, and especially to Anuba for her support and unconditional love and guidance. I thank you to my astral guides who are always there supporting me in the projection experience. I would like to remind you again that if you'd actually like to learn more of the specifics and how you can become confident and efficient in astral projecting, you can find more details in the link to my Patreon page. My new website will be up in a couple of weeks, so I will link that. Stay on the lookout for that. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook. I'll also put those links below as well. If you could please like and subscribe. I'm very new to this, so I'm not going to hammer on too much about all of that, but I do really appreciate your presence, and your support helps me grow and have these galactic races, these open contact experiences, reach places where we are at the moment in a time of open contact. We're in a window of open contact. So most importantly, thank you so much for being you. And until the next episode, I wish you well. I send my unconditional love to each of you. Bye for now.